Good morning. It is Wednesday, February 20th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo and doesn't consider himself a conservative because of where he stands on the issues. Years ago, the Democrats created this issues-based political system and created thereby an action-reaction political dynamic with Republicans, conservatives, playing the role of reactionary. And in reality, the way it stands in terms of your politics is where you stand on change. You make the presumption for the status quo, you're conservative, you're normal. If you make the presumption for change, you are a liberal. And change is indicated when there's an obvious improvement to the status quo that is available. And again, obvious cases for change: slavery is an obvious case for change. Jim Crow is an obvious case for change. Some things that are obvious cases for change today involve anything that involves a conflict of interest is corrupt, and therefore there is an obvious case for change. Public employee unions are have an inherent conflict of interest and are therefore ripe for change. All public employee unions should be decertified, and the people in them should be made civil servants immediately. And another case is with when you have people that regulate themselves, that's an inherent conflict of interest, obviously. And we have that with doctors and with lawyers. Doctors have their medical boards, and the lawyers have a bar association. Who sits on the bar? Who sits on the medical boards? Oh, guess what? Doctors and lawyers. So in effect, doctors and lawyers are regulating themselves. We wouldn't put up with that crap anywhere else. If we had an agency that was regulating the oil industry, we would not expect that the members of that agency would be made up of oil company executives. If we found that out, we would rightfully have a fit and demand immediate change, as we should with doctors and lawyers. Today's Op Hawkeye, the entry from Op Hawkeye, let's put it this way, the memorial of the day is for, or another way to put it is, as Op Hawkeye puts it, today's veteran tribute. U.S. Navy Chief Petty Officer David A. Fegyo. He enlisted in the Navy in 2002 and went on to complete his basic training at NTC Great Lakes, Illinois. He initially trained as a quartermaster at A School. In September 2003, he attended BUDS training at NAB Coronado, California, where he graduated with Class 245. After earning his SEAL Trident, CPO Fegyo was assigned to SEAL Team 10, where he served until 2010. He then attended the grueling selection process known only as Green Team, where he was selected to serve with the elite Naval Special Warfare Development Group, aka DevGru, or SEAL Team 6, at Dam Neck, Virginia. He served with Dev Group Blue Squadron as a leading petty officer and breacher from 2010 onwards. He sadly died on October 5th, 2014, after a long battle with cancer. He leaves behind his wife and daughter, as well as his parents and various other family members, friends, and teammates. Rest easy, warrior. Always remembered, never forgotten. The Pirates. And again, that's from Op Hawkeye, OP_HAWKEYE. And that's the at Op Hawkeye is where you can find these entries on Instagram. So I was listening to, and again, my biggest complaint about Republican pundits is that they spend more time promoting socialism in the left than they do promoting conservatism. And this morning there was a classic example on the Glenn Beck show. Glenn Beck was interviewing a lady that had written a book about how civilizations fall that kill their children, which is obviously, they're talking about abortion. So supposedly this Saturday, there's going to be some kind of, she was saying, I heard her say that businesses should close, everybody should wear black, and then there's some kind of a rally apparently that's going to be held. And immediately I thought, wow, how left of her. The next thing that she was doing was in terms of acting like a lefty. I'm trying to remember exactly what the way that it is that she put this. That's right. She wanted to, she's emphasizing the intensity with which the left, she was complaining basically that the left has more intensity with their supporting their issues than the right does. And my thought with both of these is, wow, that's great. Why don't we just pretend we're left? We'll just ape the left. We will consult with the left every time we need to do something. We'll go ask Nancy Pelosi, or we'll go ask Miss Cortez in New York what it is we should do and how we should do it. Because again, with the rally that they're going to do, and everybody's got to wear black and close their stores, she's organizing. That's what the left does. The left organizes because the left does not recognize the power or the validity or the authority of the individual. For the left, it is the group that matters, the group that counts. And this is where the right, conservatives, go astray. They think that in order to deal with these kinds of groups and these kinds of organizations, then the right must ape the left and organize themselves and pit one organization against another, which really plays into the left's hands, because ultimately the left is looking for a worldwide socialist revolution ending in socialist paradise. So you get two groups of organized people, and like you see it very often at various rallies, where you'll have the atheist anarchists that show up, and then there is some type of counterforce that also shows up, and then they end up having a clash, and the police get involved. But fortunately, and I don't believe it'll ever happen, that it will escalate into civil war or revolution. But the point is, why bother to ape the left? If we're going to honor the left constantly, then why do we bother being conservatives? Again, if you want people to do certain things, then ask them to do it as an individual. Give them a remedy or solution that they can exercise, or that they can do as an individual. And then as far as the intensity, she also is wrong there. The right, the conservatives, do have a lot of intensity, especially when it comes to abortion. There's a lot of groups that have gone out and approached abortion clinics with the idea of trying to convince women to either put their children up for adoption or find some other type of a solution rather than aborting their children. And they do that with quite a bit of intensity. But again, the emphasis would be on, instead of reacting to the left and what it is that the left does, the idea is, let's promote something and let's take the initiative for a change. Texas gets it right when it comes to abortion from the initiative standpoint. Texas isn't waiting around to see what the left is going to do, or waiting around for the left to make some sort of promote some kind of a law that they can then fight or defend against. No, Texas goes on the offense. Texas says, well, let me see. We got Roe v. Wade. Where are the loopholes? Because we're going to go ahead and plug those loopholes. We're going to go ahead and declare that abortions that are done after a certain period of time are illegal. There's a new one now out in Mississippi that has just gotten passed, and this is a fantastic, again, example of taking the initiative. This is what conservatives should be doing. Conservatives that want to know, what can I do? What can I do? Take the initiative. Quit waiting for the left to do something so you can react to it. Take the initiative. And in this particular case in Mississippi, brilliant case of taking the initiative by something that's called the heartbeat law, in which abortions are banned for any child in which there is a heartbeat. You can pick up or notice a heartbeat. I don't know the details of it, if it has to be with a stethoscope or if you can notice a heartbeat, and I don't know exactly how they come up with the definitions for that. But the point is they're going on the offensive. This is frequently where the NRA goes wrong. The NRA seems to sit dormant most of the time, sit on their collective fat asses and do nothing until the right says, hey, I got a great idea, let's ban guns. Then the NRA swings into action, and if we're lucky, then whatever proposal that has been made by the left gets struck down completely. If we're not lucky, then it only ends up getting modified, and we only lose part of our rights instead of the whole thing. And if the NRA would spend more time going on offense, looking to go to every state in this country and make it legal for open carry, make it much easier for the law-abiding citizen to get a concealed carry permit, et cetera, to make sure that all reasonable weaponry, of course, we're not talking about nuclear weapons, biological, chemical, but I'm talking about what the left likes to refer to as what do you call the rifles that are assault weapons? What are dysphemistically called assault weapons by the left, and really nothing more than a rifle. That's all it is, and it's a semi-auto rifle. Go on the offensive and make sure that they're legal in every single state. Another place where they can, the NRA can make a difference is in the state of California. They have a de facto gun registration. Okay, in New York, it is a gun registration, but it's de jure, not de facto. In the state of California, they couldn't pass a law to make people register their weapons. So what they did instead was they said you have to go through a background check, which the NRA hacked off on, by the way. They said, oh, okay, that sounds reasonable. Yeah, okay, that's reasonable. That's cool. And then the state of California simply doesn't throw the records away. They file them. I had a situation where I had a police officer that was questioning me about where I was parking my RV. There was apparently the chief of police didn't like where I was parking the RV. But anyways, we got into a situation where the officer was confused because I had a permit to park the RV. So we started going, he started trying to figure out, what's going on. He even checked my trunk. Oh, no, he had asked me. He said, well, do you have any weapons on you, I think? And I told him, yeah, I've got a 9mm in the trunk, unloaded. It's in a case. So he goes, have me open the trunk. He looks at the thing, and he calls it in. He looks at the serial number on the bottom of the handgun, and he calls it in to his dispatcher. Says, here's the number, blah, 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 blah. We wait for, I don't know, maybe not even 30 seconds, and she came back with my name, my address, everything. De facto gun registration. And that's where the NRA should be getting into California and saying, no way. Once these background checks have been completed, you must destroy the records. So, again, go on offense. This is where one of the weakest points for conservatives as a whole, and particularly conservative pundits. And it's particularly important for the pundits because they set the example for everybody else. So, when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the Ayn Rand lexicon. Thank you very much. Welcome back. The Ayn Rand lexicon, it's a great treasure, one of the great books that you can read. If you don't want to slog through Ayn Rand nonfiction or fiction work, and by the way, I would recommend that you start with her nonfiction stuff. I find her, I've read The Fountainhead. I haven't read Atlas Shrugged yet. I've got it, but I haven't read it yet because when she writes a novel, I mean, it's hefty. You're going to spend some time, 800, 900,000 pages, that kind of thing. And but I'd recommend you start with nonfiction so you can get an understanding of what it is she's trying to communicate, because she communicates a lot of her philosophical theories through her fiction works. And if you get kind of gives you a head start to read her nonfiction materials. And the one book I'd recommend first is Philosophy Who Needs It, Chapter 1. Read that. It's absolutely fabulous. It's right on, and it's an eye-opener. It'll really give you an indication of what it is that is really going on in the world. And anyhow, and even before you do that, it'd be a good idea to get the Ayn Rand lexicon and read through it. Even just thumb through it and find words or concepts that maybe you thought you were familiar with, but maybe you're not so familiar with, and read some of these concepts because that will give you a glimmer, an insight into the way Ayn Rand thinks. So the concept of the day today is focus. In any hour and issue of his life, man is free to think or to evade that effort. Thinking requires a state of full, focused awareness. The act of focusing one's consciousness is volitional. Man can focus his mind to a full, active, purposefully directed awareness of reality, or he can unfocus it and let himself drift in a semi-conscious daze, merely reacting to any chance stimulus of the immediate moment, at the mercy of his undirected sensory perceptual mechanism and of any random associational connections it might happen to make. When man unfocuses his mind, he may be said to be conscious in a subhuman sense of the word, since he experiences sensations and perceptions, but in the sense of the word applicable to man, in the sense of a consciousness which is aware of reality and able to deal with it, a consciousness able to direct the actions and provide for the survival of a human being. An unfocused mind is not conscious. Psychologically, the choice to think or not is the choice to focus or not. Existentially, the choice to focus or not is the choice to be conscious or not. Metaphysically, the choice to be conscious or not is the choice of life or death. Excuse me. Focus designates a quality of one's mental state, a quality of active alertness. Focus means the state of goal-directed mind committed to attaining full awareness of reality. It's the state of a mind committed to seeing, to grasping, to understanding, to knowing. Full awareness does not mean omniscience. It means commitment to grasp all the facts relevant to one's concern and activity at any given time, as against a splintered grasp, a grasp of some facts, while others which you know to be relevant are left in fog. By full, I include also the commitment to grasp the relevant facts clearly, with the fullest clarity and precision one is capable of. Excuse me. Focus is not synonymous with thinking in the sense of step-by-step problem solving or the drawing of new conclusions. You may be walking down the street merely contemplating the sights, but you can do it in focus or out of focus. In focus would mean that you had some purpose directing your mental activity. In this case, a simple one, to observe the sights, but this is still a purpose, and it implies that you know what you are doing mentally, that you have set yourself a goal and are carrying it out, that you have assumed the responsibility of taking control of your consciousness and directing it. The process of focus is not the same as the process of thought. It is the precondition of thought. Just as you must first focus your eyes, and then if you choose, you can turn your gaze systematically to the objects on the table in front of you and inventory them, so first must you focus your mind. And then, when you choose, you can direct that focus to the step-by-step resolution of a specific problem, which latter is thinking. Concentration means undivided attention on some particular task or object. It is an attention and activity devoted to a particular subject. You need to be in focus in order to concentrate, but focus is the particular set of your consciousness, which is not delimited by the particular task, object, or action that you are concentrating on. You do have to focus on something, but focus is not limited to the continuing task that you are performing. The concept focus isn't tied to the concrete. It remains the same no matter what you are focused on. It is the set of your mind. And that was the concept focus from the Ayn Rand lexicon, The Concept of the Day. Back in a minute. Thank you very much. Welcome back. Ben Shapiro has written a book called not media bullies, bullies in general, about how the left bullies and intimidates the right, basically, or anybody else, libertarians, objectivists, all that stuff. And they do so psychologistically. They use psychological tools and techniques to manipulate initially, if they can, and if not, then to bully and intimidate. And so this section of the chapter is called Media Bullies. On April 18, 2006, police arrested Duke University lacrosse player Reed Seligman and Colin Finnerty, for the alleged rape and kidnapping of stripper Crystal Mangum. Mangum had falsely accused 3 white lacrosse players of raping her at a March party. The entire 2006 Duke lacrosse season was ultimately canceled. The media couldn't get enough of the case. They quickly turned it into an example of white-on-black racism, brutal exploitation in the mold of pre-Civil War slavery. Amanda Marcotte, a feminist bully blogger, a feminist bully blogger attacked CNN for not immediately condemning the accused. Can't a few white boys sexually assault a black woman anymore without getting people all wound up about it? So unfair. A few months later, Marcotte was hired by the John Edwards presidential campaign as an official blogger. As it turned out, there was actually a better shot that John Edwards had had sex with Crystal Mangum than the Duke lacrosse players had. Marcotte may have been the loudest of the bunch, but she certainly wasn't the only journalist preternaturally eager to beat Duke lacrosse with a stripper pole. USA Today tracked down a Duke graduate student to complain, quote, "I'm still afraid that people involved will just get a slap on the wrist. Because of Duke's culture of privilege and superiority, they'll get away with it," unquote. The same reporter who also lauded Duke students for distributing a flyer that, quote, "looked like a wanted poster, 40 faces of young men smiling smugly for the camera. These men are wanted on the Duke campus," unquote. Janet Reitman of Rolling Stone reported, quote unquote, on Duke's, quote, retro view of rape, unquote. Reitman did not report on the stripper's retro view of perjury. Nancy Grace of CNN led the disgraceful posse looking to string up the Duke defendants sans evidence. On June 9, 2006, Grace interviewed a local North Carolina reporter who expressed the widespread sentiment that the case was falling apart already. Grace quickly whipped a Hitler mustache out of her back pocket and stapled it to the guy's upper lip. Quote, "Well, I'm glad you've already decided the outcome of the case based on all of the defense filings. Why don't we just all move to Nazi Germany where we don't have a justice system and a jury of one's peers? What about it, Joe Lawless?" Unquote. The New York Times, too, worked to keep the case alive even as it began to crumble. Duff Wilson and Jonathan Glader penned a piece in August 2006 stating, quote, "By disclosing pieces of evidence favorable to the defendants, the defense has created an image of a case heading for the rocks. But an examination of the entire 1,850 pages of evidence gathered by the prosecution in the 4 months after the accusation yields a more ambiguous picture. It shows that while there are big weaknesses in Mr. Naifong's case, there's also a body of evidence to support his decision to take the matter to a jury. Except that there wasn't a body of evidence to support it. As it turned out, the stripper accuser had told a second dancer at the lacrosse party to, quote, "put marks on me," unquote, to fake injury after the party. Naifong admitted he hadn't talked to the alleged victim as late as October. DNA tests showed no DNA from the supposed rapists. Seligman, it turned out, had a solid alibi. Naifong, who was running for re-election as he was pursuing the case, ended up dropping it and resigning his job, but not before the Times ran more than 100 pieces on the case. Even after the Duke lacrosse rape case fell apart, the liberal media wouldn't let it go. Quote, "As students of Duke University or other elite institutions, these young men will get on with their privileged lives," unquote, wrote Terry Moran of abcnews.com. Quote, "They are very differently situated in life from, say, the young women of the Rutgers University women's basketball team," unquote. The Rutgers basketball team had indeed been foolishly and nastily slandered as, quote, "nappy-headed hoes," unquote, by radio host Don Imus, generating national headlines. But the Duke lacrosse team had been accused of a brutal lynch raping, which could have resulted in long prison sentences, and at the very least would follow them the rest of their lives. But Terry Moran was comparing the two. Somehow this didn't pass the smell test. In the aftermath of the Duke lacrosse fiasco, those in the media held their noses and admitted culpability. Quote, "It was too delicious a story," unquote, said former New York Times public editor Daniel Okrent. Quote, "It conformed too well to too many preconceived notions of too many in the press. White over blacks, rich over poor, athletes over non-athletes, men over women, educated over non-educated." Wow, that's a package of sins that really fit the preconceptions of a lot of us, unquote. This was the crux of the matter. It wasn't that the media was fooled. They have the same reasoning skills as the rest of us. And it was clear within days of the Duke lacrosse allegations that the case was somewhere between the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot on the truth scale. So why didn't they catch on to the fact that all of this was less credible than Paris Hilton swearing chastity? Because they wanted it to be true. They needed it to be true. They had an agenda, and they were going to ensure that the story played out the way they wanted it to. The facts were irrelevant. In the case of the Duke lacrosse faux rape, there was no real coordination between the media and other leftist power institutions. But often, that isn't the case. In situations of national importance, there is a clear and convincing evidence of collusion between the leftist media and leftist politicians, interest groups, and other power brokers. And the media is the tip of that spear. They're the new IRS, sicked by the organized democratic infrastructure to destroy anyone who dares defy them. While the much-derided blogosphere breaks virtually every big story these days, Wienergate, Rathergate, Trayvon Martin, the mainstream media lag behind and snipes. Tina Brown of Newsweek, a formerly great publication recently sold for the bargain basement price of $1, suggests that those in the blogosphere aren't, quote, real journalists, unquote. And she's right. She's right because all the real journalists are Democrat Party hacks. In March 2009, Politico, a publication that used to play at objectivity but has become obviously key cog in the left-wing media, revealed the existence of, quote, an off-the-record online meeting space called Journalist, unquote. The list was formed by Ezra Klein, a blogger for the far-left American Prospect, and who later became a columnist for the Washington Post. Basically, he told Politico, quote, "It's just a list where journalists and policy wonks can discuss issues freely," unquote. Which journalists? Eric Alterman of The Nation, Jerry Toobin of CNN and The New Yorker, Paul Krugman of The New York Times, writers from the Huffington Post, Politico, Newsweek. The list went on and on. And they sure did coordinate. In April 2008, journalists suddenly began ripping ABC's Democrat presidential debate coverage, particularly the focus on Barack Obama's longtime mentor and pastor, Jeremiah Wright. It seemed like a grassroots phenomenon. Not quite. Politico reported, quote, Politico contacted nearly 36 current J-list members for this story. The majority either declined to comment or didn't respond to interview requests, and then returned to J-list to post items on why they wouldn't be talking to Politico about what goes on there, unquote. But, said Toobin, quote, no one's pushing an agenda, unquote. Right. In June 2009, Andrew Breitbart offered $100,000 for a full emporium of all the Journalist emails. Nobody at Journalist took him up on the offer, although Ben Smith, then of Politico, played defense for the Journalist. This is a classic case, quote, this is a classic case in which secrecy produces wild imaginings. There aren't many good conspiracies involving 400 people, some of them ideologues, some columnists, some mainstream media types like me who enjoyed access to that conversation, as I sometimes enjoy access to private conservative conversations at venues like New York's off-record conservative Monday meeting, unquote. Ben Smith, it's worth noting, minimizes left-wing scandal so often that John Nolte, one of my Breitbart News colleagues, has coined a term for the tactic, Ben Smithing. The point, of course, wasn't that every email in the Journalist chain was solid gold. The point was that these reporters were coordinating messages, left-wing messages. Klein, who organized the list, admitted it. Quote, the membership would range from nonpartisan to liberal, center to left. I didn't like that rule, but I thought it necessary. What I didn't expect was that a member of the list or someone given access by a member of the list would trawl through the archives to assemble a dossier of quotes from one particular member and then release them to an interested media outlet to embarrass him. But that's what happened to David Weigel. Weigel was, at the time, a Washington Post reporter. His job there was to report on conservatives. You can guess what happened next. On Journalist, it turned out Weigel had been putting out one rabidly anti-conservative email after another. When Rush Limbaugh had chest pains, Weigel wrote, "I hope he fails." Too soon? Weigel wrote that conservatives used the media to, quote, violently, angrily divide America, unquote, mainly because they were racists protecting, quote, white privilege, unquote. And, of course, he went after the daddy of all right-wing influence wielders, Matt Drudge. Quote, "It's really a disgrace that an amoral shut-in like Drudge maintains the influence he does on the news cycle while gay-baiting, lying, and flubbing facts to this degree," unquote. As for Sarah Palin, quote, "Let's move the F on already," unquote. And on James O'Keefe, the man who broke Acorn after O'Keefe's run-in with Louisiana authorities, quote, "He's either going to get a radio talk show or start a prison ministry." That was successful conservative RATFers. Rat effers, I get, do for their second acts, unquote. Weigel had to step down from his job at the Post and promptly began reporting for Slate. Had Weigel been a conservative masquerading at objectivity and unmasked politically, he would have found himself demonized by the mainstream media. But Weigel undoubtedly will at some point find himself serving in a Democratic administration. After that, he can moderate presidential debates. After all, if it worked for George the Keebler elf Stephanopoulos. There we go. Okay. Anyways. Now, none of this is to argue that conservative journalists don't talk amongst themselves and with people on their side of the political aisle. Of course they do, but they don't also hide behind the facade of objectivity. Michelle Malkin is conservative, so is Sean Hannity. Bill O'Reilly is a populist. Rush Limbaugh's a conservative. Conservative journalists are opinion journalists, and that doesn't stop them from breaking stories. In fact, that's the non-objectivity that makes them more honest than the supposedly above-it-all crowd at the New York Times, which secretly shills for the Obama administration. But the left-wing journalistic establishment, which actively fights to keep right-wingers out, as Bernard Goldberg of CBS News pointed out in his book Bias, still pretends that they're not biased. And that means that as their profit margins shrink, they call for aid from government. For the same reason that the government supports National Public Radio, they suggest the government ought to support them. Not surprisingly, President Obama thinks this is a great idea. Quote, "I haven't seen detailed proposals yet, but I'll be happy to look at them," unquote, he said of prospective bills that would grant tax breaks to failing newspapers to turn non-profit. Quote, "I am concerned that if the direction of the news is all blogosphere, all opinions with no serious fact-checking," unquote, said Obama, quote, "no serious attempts to put stories into context, that what you will end up with is people shouting at each other across the void, but not a lot of mutual understanding," unquote. Or you might get a variety of voices that report the news from different angles. You could even call it something creative, like the, quote, blogosphere, unquote, or something. You might end the hegemony of a Democrat journalistic establishment dedicated to upholding liberalism at all costs. And God knows the media couldn't allow that. The left couldn't deal with the loss of control of viewpoint, the kind of control they had on the journalist. And most of all, Obama couldn't allow that. If he did, what would happen to him and the movement that stands behind him? A couple of comments real quick. What he was saying about the Duke lacrosse players reminds me also of what happened with Jussie Smollett recently. And both of these incidents happened under Republican presidents. The Duke lacrosse one was in 2006, in the middle of the second term of George W. Bush, who was a controversial president because he was elected in 2000 to just barely. He just barely ended up getting elected. And he was running against Al Gore, who was the vice president of Bill Clinton. So, and it came down to counting votes and chads, and actually ended up going to the Supreme Court and whatnot. It was a big problem, and a lot of Democrats were claiming, which they would have claimed anyhow, that the Republicans stole the election. So, and every time the left loses, they do that. They got to look for some kind of a scapegoat. In 2006, it was Florida, and with President Trump, it is the Russians. So, there you go. But Yeah, there's a similarity there where they're always trying to suggest, they won't say it outright because they want to get into your psychology, they want to get into your psyche. If they say it outright that, hey, this president is evil and wicked and he is promoting racism and bigotry of all sorts, most people are going to reject that outright, or they're going to stop and ask at least, well, what proof do you have of that? They don't want to deal with proof. They just want you to believe it because they say so. They want to manipulate you or bully and intimidate you into going along with this idea. So that's why they they make these suggestions. With Jussie Smollett, there were the same kind of things where left-wing journalists and politicians across the board came out on Twitter and made all kinds of statements. Wow, it's sad that this is kind of things happening in 2019, and bigotry and racism has to be stopped today, and other things where it seemed that all they needed to do to complete the statement was put in the name Donald Trump, and you would have made the obvious connection. But it seemed obvious nonetheless that what they were trying to do was place the blame for what happened to Jussie Smollett at the feet of Donald Trump, and by extension, the people that voted for him. The left has never gotten finished punishing, and will not get finished punishing, the American electorate for voting Donald Trump into office, as they spent 4 or 8 years hounding the voters for putting George W. Bush into office. So, and at this point, that brings us to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.